Welcome to Man at the Tap, a podcast from Tapestry Ministries. Each episode reflects on a daily Bible reading from the Revised Common Lectionary. I'm Gloria, a fellow traveler on a spiritual journey with the Tapestry community, and we refer to the daily Bible reading as our spiritual manna. It nourishes our souls, fostering spiritual growth as we share insights and interpretations that enrich our spiritual lives. Today is Tuesday, July the 8th, 2025, the fourth week after Pentecost in the season of ordinary time. It is a time for us to live an extraordinary disciplined life as we experience spiritual growth. The lectionary reading is from the book of Psalms, chapter 119, the longest chapter in the entire Bible. Psalm 119 celebrates that God's commands are meant for the good of humanity and are an expression of God's love. The psalm has 22 stanzas, each containing 8 verses arranged according to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet in order. The lectionary reading today is verses 73 to 80, which correspond to the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And in the opening verses, the psalmist acknowledges God as creator, which sparks a desire for the psalmist to learn God's commandments. The psalmist clearly experiences their need for God's loving kindness and mercy and trusts that God will fulfill God's promises. But a reality of life that the psalmist observed is the experience of pain and suffering, which can cause people to question God and wonder about God's promises. Pain and suffering can even lead one to doubt God's character. The psalmist, however, is thankful for God's faithfulness during times of suffering, and the psalmist is confident that deliverance is on the way because of the hope the psalmist has placed in God's word and in what God has declared. The psalmist trusts that God always acts rightly, in the right way, for the right reason, and that God's ways are never flawed or incomplete. And then the psalmist will ask that God's compassion and mercy be granted to them so they may live for God's laws that provide comfort and delight. The enemies of God had slandered and spoken lies against the psalmist, who was beginning to weaken under the verbal assault. However, the psalmist recognized what was happening and decided instead to meditate on God's word, remaining faithful to God regardless of the circumstances. For a time, the psalmist felt alone in their pain and suffering. But now, towards the end of the stanza, the psalmist is thankful to be surrounded by others who love and understand God's statutes. In the final verse of the 10th stanza of Psalm 119, verse 18, the psalmist prayed, "Let me truly respect your law so that I won't be ashamed."